right. Hi, guys. If you don't know me, I'm Eric Gall. I teach English and history in the upper division and specifically in the high school this year. Allison Spooner and Karen Norris, they also teach English to junior high and senior high. And we are going to talk with you a little bit about some steps that your students can take towards, or your child can take towards writing more effectively. Sort of keeping the organization of, you know, how do I get from the question I'm being asked to the answer. And this does cover short answers to essays. So we're going to give you some short answer examples and some essay examples as well as we go through. But first, Mrs. Norris is going to start us off with an activity.
Yes. Just to kind of get started with kind of where we're going with this workshop this evening is to find out kind of what you guys know a little bit already as parents who I know you help your daughter or your son every once in a while with an assignment. So what we're trying to do is with us teachers here that do develop formal and informal assessments, where we go with those assessments and asking those questions, and why do we ask those questions the way we do. We are getting toward a more higher order thinking to know if we were to ask a student a question on a test, what we ask them to demonstrate are in different areas of their higher order thinking, okay? And so to get us started, I have these little packets, and I may ask you to, I think I may have enough. I do, actually. Here we go, exactly. If you can open those up and kind of just sort them out, what we're looking at here is the different types of questions and what ability we're looking at in resolving that question. So if you want to put all your questions on one side and then all the answers on the other side, we are actually asking each student to demonstrate a certain ability in their mind, either to reflect or to respond or to analyze, and these questions trigger that, all right? So that's kind of our angle with this little activity, all right? So give you a minute or two to see if you can match them up. You didn't think you would have to be on the spot tonight. Oh, we're teachers, you know we're going to just pick your brain a little bit. Hey, you can ask your neighbor, sure. Group project. Yeah, you can make it happen. I think there's 8 all together, and it's a perfect matchup. Each question requires a certain perception and way to answer that question. I'll give you a hint. There are some that demonstrate the ability to repeat learned information, and then there are questions that demonstrate the ability to respond to learned information, and then there's questions that demonstrate the ability to reflect on learned information. Those are the kind of 3 main big umbrella ideas with these questions. I'll give you 1 more minute. Just guess. Just guess.
This is a participation-based grading.
Yes. We'll give you about 30 more seconds, and then we'll just help you out there.
You go at the same place?
Yeah, when we first got these at a workshop ourselves, we were like, okay. See if we can put this into action. And that is our goal here at Noble, is to start. Some of these are basic questions, but as you can see, it builds into a little bit more of a analytical question, and we're going to talk about that because that's what short answers start small and then it builds to essay type questions. Okay, you ready for some help?
No, we need a minute.
To go get it.
She wants to solve it.
I know where Zach gets it from.
Where's it?
Skip the answer.
My son's
There is a
us.
note on that.
There's an answer sheet.
There's a code. Just to help you out. If it honestly, if you're between one or the other.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ready for that.
has brought home, you would rarely see a who cares statement, but what is it referring to? What recall is it trying to establish here? But we see a lot of the why and the when and the which and the how and what should. So let's see if we can match up, okay? The what is, if you find your what is, requires recall and recognition. You got that one right? Woo-hoo, 1 point. Okay, what that does is it demonstrates the ability for a student to repeat learned information. Okay, that one just triggers what was learned and can you apply it? It doesn't recreate any other concept there. The next one is how. Find how. This requires explanation. Your how requires the student to explain that question. Okay, that's the how component.
Am I right in saying that we're starting at the
basic and we're building?
working way down?
We are. Yep. Yes. The why requires analysis. If you were asking why did that character in this story come to a certain conclusion, you'd have to analyze an action or maybe even some of the dialogue in that story, which requires judgment. It's a judgment call. This is basically talking about the content of the story, and they have to determine, making a judgment call with the question of which. When requires application. When did something happen? That's your application question.
That makes sense for us how to me.
Did it? All of the last four that I just gave you, the how, why, which, and when, will require the student to effectively to respond to learned information. So it's not just learning it and putting it back on paper, it's learning it and understanding why did that character do that, how, and then when and which is application and judgment call.
And I think, I mean, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead,
I think,
no, you're
like,
good.
of course you're gonna have a when question that is just basic recall. I mean, so that could be tricky. Like if we just said, when did
The American Revolutionary War end?
and then it's
Yeah,
a date,
it's the
you know. But I mean, I guess that we're talking about more about like apply. Like, can you think of a good when question that would go for that?
Look on that, see if you can look on that sample, see if we have one of those on
On the
there.
sample?
Yeah, on your handout, that would be good. And cause I wanna get through this, we got stuff crazy we wanted to check out. And next one is the what if. Okay, your what if. Put my page over. Your
Oh,
what
I
if.
have an example
You
off the
do?
top of my head. It was
Okay.
something I gave one of my US history students when we talked about the American Revolution.
Okay.
When is it okay to
Yeah.
rebel against one's government?
Yeah.
Would be more of an analytical question.
Okay, your what if requires projecting and predicting. What if, ooh, anybody else get some more?
I'm not doing very well at this test.
All right, the next one is what should. Requires perception and inference and interpretation. What should. And the last one is who cares. This is drawing a conclusion, gaining perspective, and recognizing a purpose. The last three demonstrates the ability for the student to effectively reflect on what they learned and make a self-application. Okay, that's kind of applying it to their self. So these are just some basic questions that you can see when you kind of chart them out like this. What exactly is the student being asked to demonstrate when they see these types of questions? Whether it be a short answer or building into an essay question.
Did you give them feedback that's what that question was, and
Oh.
this is how you were supposed to answer it?
A lot of times these types of questions are presented and modeled orally in a classroom in more of a discussion setup before they will even see them on a type of a test or a quiz. So it's more of like a community discussion. All right, the question is brought up like Mr. Gall used the story or the question from your American Revolutionary. What was
When is it okay to rebel against one's government?
So that would be more of a group discussion prior to them seeing it on here, and we would talk about when you make a judgment call, you often would see it asked like this. So it is openly discussed, and then it is also used in test formats on short answer and essay.
Yeah. So for example, like with the when question, we talked about the colonists and the circumstances that they were under that led them to rebelling against the British government. So as an example of when, explaining when. So not just, it's okay to rebel during this certain time, or, when is it absolutely necessary, not just when is it okay, but when is it you know, what circumstances lead to something. It's basically cause and effect, but with more of an opinion and analytical side to it.
All right, so we created a quick Prezi for you guys, and we have 5 steps, which I think is kind of funny because, of course, writing is one of the most complex things that we do as students and even as adults. So obviously, these 5 steps are not the only thing that is going to create success for your kiddo, but we thought this would be kind of at least a starting point for our discussion tonight. So when we're having kids answer short answer questions all the way up to essays, the first step that we want kids to do is to identify. We want them to identify the type of question and how many parts there are to the question. So just like Karen led you in that activity, we want kids to be familiar with this kind of language of what types of questions they're being asked. And also we want them to notice if there are different parts to the question. So teachers love to do or like one question and then and then the second part of the question. So kids like to just answer the first part often because they get focused on that and then they forget all about the second part. So we want to help kids, learn to read the whole question. Some of the strategies for that is to take their highlighter or to underline the important words in the question so they can really just keep that as the focus, and to separate the multiple part questions. So however that works for kids, if it means that they want to answer this on one side and then answer this, or just put a 1 here and then a 2 and then a 3 so that they know not to skip parts of the question.
It's all about developing a system, much like note-taking. If they can develop a system to figure out how many parts of the question there are, what are the key phrases, what are the key words, let's identify them, let's circle them, or put a box around them, or underline them. And that way also when they're coming back to the question, let's say it's a more complicated question like an essay question, they're able to come back to it and say, oh yeah, I boxed the type of question it's asking. That's a why, so I'm answering the why. I underlined the character's name because this question is about that character. So it really is useful, but it's all about developing a system. So I like to use underlining and highlighting, but and that's very commonly what we use, but you can really use anything. It's all about a system.
Teaching this to the children? I mean, you're giving this to parents, well, just like the underlining and so you're going
like we're actually doing note taking this week with a biography, and autobiographies are next week, and it's the same concept.
Okay.
Is when you read a story of a person's life, and it's in a short story version, you highlight major events. Those things need to pop out because in it is also some kind of just information, background information that's not a major event, and so that's part of the note taking is to go in and it's called chunking, or you can highlight just information that needs to be recalled when you're writing, especially if you're going to write a paper about a biography or the story read.
And when we write about literature, we go over in class, they might all have the same question, but different responses to them. So we go over the question, we talk about what exactly are you answering? What are the important parts of that question? And hopefully they'll be able to carry those over when they have their assessments and understand, well, if I'm not sure what the question is right off the bat, let me go about my process of figuring out, is it a what, is it a why, is it a how, what are the big points in the sentence, or in the question, is there an and, meaning there's more than one part to the question, just getting in the habit of doing that.
And can they do those markings and things like that on their assessment?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Even on things like the PSAT and that type of thing, would you have to have that?
They can mark in their book, so I would say that is an excellent test-taking strategy and probably one of,
Most commonly.
yeah,
Okay.
I would think so, yeah. Because this, we're not daily giving them, paper, pencil, assessment type questions, but certainly this can apply directly to PSAT, SAT, that kind of thing. Did you have something before I go on, or should I
No.
keep going?
No,
Okay.
you're fine. Thanks.
Alright, so step 2 is brainstorm. This is obviously a really important part of the writing process. So we want them to be able to use their background knowledge as well as the research, their notes, anything that any other reference materials that they have to be able to brainstorm the answer. So again, I think what Eric was saying about students really developing their own strategy. I mean, we try to teach different graphic organizers to kids to help them organize their thoughts, but as they get older, they need to kind of start developing what works for them. So, I mean, I noticed my older, my high schoolers are usually, are able to start doing that much more than my 7th graders who need to be told, okay, we're gonna create, a chart, or we're gonna create a diagram, a Venn diagram. But as they get more practice with that, they should start to be able to say, oh, this question is asking me to compare two things. I'm gonna make, a Venn diagram.
And the example for the brainstorm part, the question I gave you, the example question, just very simple from the 3 little pigs. Why did the first 2 little pigs run to the house of the 3rd pig, and what practical lesson might be learned from this? The example for step 2 brainstorm, it's more of a free write example, because some students prefer to free write their thoughts and just kind of get them down on paper or type them down in order to then start organizing, which is our step 3. But some prefer to go straight to the graphic organizer and put steps 2 and 3 together. So it all depends. A lot of times when I have students who are struggling with organizing their information, it's because they haven't thought of information to organize yet, or they've only thought of part of it. So I'll tell them to free write, or to just write anything that occurs to them, and then worry about organizing it later, because they'll have the information that relates to the subject, and they'll be able to make sense of it after they're finished with their kind of thought storm, the brainstorm.
Okay, so like we were saying, organize is step 3. This is where they plan their answers. They want to make sure they're deciding which part they're going to answer first. They're putting it in the right order. They want to make sure to keep the main point, so they're not going off into tangents and all of a sudden they're answering a question that wasn't even part of the question to begin with, which happens, because they
I think the more information there, then the better the answer.
Or of course you want to write about something that you're more comfortable with, and so if they start thinking about something else that they are more comfortable writing, then they often do that. Any other thoughts about organizing?
Just that there are many different ways to do it, and part of what we do is we give the students different kinds of graphic organizers to help them figure out what organizes them best. I have students who I've taught a couple years now who still prefer to go with the tower diagrams. I have some who just prefer to make a bullet point list like what you see for example 3. So it doesn't matter too much to me personally as a teacher unless I'm teaching that type of graphic organizer. But once they're comfortable, once they've chosen something, it's up to them how they want to organize it, however it's going to make the most sense to them. Because that's what they're going to carry with them.
So step 4 is to write. We want students to be able to write concisely and to the point, making sure to explain the answer as if the reader does not have background knowledge. I think that is so important, because often we'll find that kids will write as if the reader is just, the teachers are the reader, so of course we know the answer, right? But they can't, it's hard for them to write in a way that just assumes that we don't know anything. That's kind of like it's a deeper thinking skill that it's not obvious to some kids, So you'll have, I'll see answers, to like a short answer question that it will just say, he did this, or, and have to go back, and who's the he? You want to, and so you just have to remind the kids to be as thorough as they can. And to, I say this a lot in class, pretend like I don't know anything. Pretend like you're writing to a stranger. Pretend like you're writing to someone who has not read this story or who has not learned this history lesson, and that usually helps. 5 is to strive. We want students to make their work that they turn in the best possible that they can. We want them to always use spell check. We usually offer kids the opportunity to write rough drafts and turn that in for feedback. And then, you know, especially if it's like on Google Drive, we can just type comments and write into the document. We can help them with their spelling if they need help with that. And then, of course, go back one more time and say, okay, did I fully answer this question? Read the question again. Read my response. Does it match? Am I answering the question that my teacher wants me to answer?
Is spell check on the Google Drive like it is on Word?
It is, but it's in a different area. It's under Tools, whereas with the most recent Microsoft Word version that I've experienced, you have to go under Review or something like that.
But I mean, the Google, because the question came up with the kids that are using the Google stuff now, that they were used to using Word, their spell check was automatic, that the question wasn't whether or not it was Google, but spell check was automatic. Is that true?
On some computers I've been on, it has not pulled up obvious spelling errors.
To prompt it to go to it.
It hasn't
and
prompted me, but when I hit spell check, then
Find it.
everything comes up.
Yeah, like on
So-
Word, it automatically have that little
Right.
line underneath
Right.
if it's spelled wrong. It's not the same on Google Drive. You would have to go to the toolbar to find it and click on it for it to discover.
So the kids, I mean, see, I don't think my daughter knew, and she has huge spelling issues, and it's something that's, I think, really important and a stumbling block for her, so I don't think she knows that on Google. I mean, is that something you guys tell them, because I'm like the most untechy person, so
It's definitely something we can
Okay.
check. I mean, if it's, I know my students all, I mean, my English students that I have, they all have it, but we can maybe communicate that to teachers. So
Yeah, and I do think some students copy it out of Google and put it into a Word document and then do what they're accustomed to. I've seen, and then put it back in Drive. I've seen students do either way, and it's just really the use of their ease or comfort in what they're used to. But that's definitely something we will, help your child with. But I do know our time is running, and we wanted time for questions and answers on just a little the lesson that we presented, but also the activity. We hope that clarifies some of the questions that you may see, not just.
If you're curious, I have a couple of student essays, just examples, if you wish to look at them. I only printed 2 out, only got to print 2 out, but if you guys are interested in just looking at a couple, I'll just leave them here.
And you're holding those up as models, as these are good examples of what we would expect and ask of.
For the most part, I mean, you're gonna have your student make some spelling errors here or some sentence errors there, but yeah, as overall, as far as organizing and, yeah. So, thank you guys so much for coming. Let us know if you have questions. You have our email addresses. They're pretty easy to find.